Well, Renee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to it.
Yes, I look forward to
Mm.
it, but I was a little bit like, oh, this one's going to be painful. It's going to bring up a lot for me personally. We're going to talk about your book today, and the title of it is After the Flowers Die, Encouragement for Walking Through Life After Loss. And anybody that's been listening to the podcast for any length of time knows that I lost my mom a year ago. And so it was so interesting because your people reached out to me. Yeah, I know you're doing like the book tour and
Mm,
stuff, but
mm,
publicity tour. But the day your person reached out to me, I was literally staring at my laptop and I was having a very dark day. And when she sent me the title of your book
mm.
and what it was about, I immediately replied to her and was like, oh my gosh, this is a God thing. It was like
Right,
so serendipitous.
mm,
I was like, this is a conversation I really need to have. So,
right,
and I'm a weirdo. I like to sort of lean into things. I think
right,
where most people are kind of avoidant. And,
mhm,
and listen, it's not that I'm not avoidant, but
mm,
I was like, I can't wait to talk to Renee about
right,
your experience and all that. So
yeah. Well, it's all that recovery work that we've done. I think that's where we press in. We know that we need to press in, and when we need to press in.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
it's a
that's
good.
a unusual character trait, I
Yeah.
think. Lean in. Or maybe
Really.
not. Isn't that what Sandberg wrote in her book? Lean
I
in.
I'm sure it is lean in, press in, push
Yeah.
in. Sometimes we just it feels more like climbing a mountain and jabbing in a stake and saying, I'm gonna stay here until something happens.
A
Where I
shift or
yes,
yeah,
yeah, and
some
where
kind
I
of
process what I need to process. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And that takes a little bit of courage, I
It
think.
does. Boldness and courage. Yeah.
Well, let's start with a little warm up round of
Mm,
questions.
mm,
I used to call it the lightning round, and then I started
mm.
calling it the turtle round, and then I just gave up. And I'm like, hey, you want to play a little game?
Yes, let's do.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
so when you first got sober, I know you got sober in 2001. Was there a book that helped you or something that really resonated with you early in recovery?
Well, I pulled out, which was just a blessing, was my 12 steps. And
Yeah.
as you can see, it's all battered. And I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at the highlights, all the lines are, so that did resonate with me. I opened the book, I remember the first time, and I dated it. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not alone. Someone else understands me. And that's how I
Yeah.
felt about the big book as well.
Yeah.
At this time, I can't remember what else I was reading. I might have been reading, there's a Christian psychologist named Larry Crabb. I might have been reading him.
I'm
Um,
sorry, what's his last name?
his name is Crabb, Larry Crabb, Crabb. And he wrote a
Okay.
number of books that were very insightful into the way we move and live and have our being, and how we accept the things that are us and how the wounds that carry us. So that he's a very intuitive writer, very smart. I love all his books.
All
I'm a
right.
fan.
Oh,
So that might have been it, but I mean, quite honestly, it was sheer desperation that moved me at that point, because I've been praying for 2 years that this obsession with alcohol, this drive, because I was by this time I was a really controlled alcoholic, and I just wanted not to be controlled any longer by having to run out. And I don't know about, there's all sorts of crazies we go through. But the days I didn't want to get drunk, I would go to the grocery. I wouldn't keep it at home because I knew what would happen. So I'd go out and get me, a beer. The days I wanted to get nicely, I'd get 3 beers. Well, when I wanted to get drunk, I would plan. I've scheduled everything. That's what a control freak I was. I scheduled it. I scheduled my Merlot nights, and I'm raising children at this time, so it was after I was very functioning. I was working, I was raising children. I was doing all the soccer mom stuff, but at the same time, so as soon as they went to bed, that was me time. There you go.
Yeah.
So I was really tired of the crazy. It just was not, we get to that point where it no longer is working. The effects produced by alcohol had long left me, in the
Mhm.
sense of I was never, they always say you want to go back to that first buzz. And that was so clear to me. And I couldn't capture it. And I realized it. And the reality, I lived in that for 2 years, but I didn't have any power. And then one night I went to bed, and the next morning it was just like, hello. And I'm pretty sure I heard from God. It was, hello, you're done, Renee. It's over. You can stop now. And it was the most beautiful moment. I had power. I had verification. I had everything that I needed to stop. And it was such freedom. It was such freedom. So it went from desperation to freedom in one day. And then I went, how am I going to do this by myself? And I immediately called AA, and I started walking the
Oh, that's
journey.
amazing.
Yeah. So that was
Yeah.
what happened with me.
Yeah.
Like the story I read was kind of my life. That was the book that changed it. I was the desperation.
Yeah, for those of you who are listening to this on the podcast, Renee held up the book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. I have that same edition, and mine is falling apart as well. It is such a good book.
It is.
And it's so interesting. Like when you're ready, you're just ready.
Mm.
And the information, this when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, kind of a
Right.
thing.
It was very
Yeah.
much so, very much so. I
Yeah.
needed it desperately.
Yeah, well, and there's something about the 2-year period too. I had that same experience where I had a really bad night with my sister and woke up the next morning and was like, that's when I started questioning my alcoholism or my drinking. I didn't call it alcoholism then. It took me 2 years. Took me 2 years of really questioning and working with those ideas, and before I was desperate enough to do the 12 steps too. So
But
yeah.
I'm also looking at, I had little signals along the way, because I started when I was 14. So I was 25 years into drinking when I stopped. But it's so funny, the things that are used, all of a sudden, I was knocking myself out in the gym and all this other stuff. And my doctor takes a blood test for insurance purposes, or the insurance people took it or whatever. And my liver functions were up.
Wow.
And he looks at me very gently. I said, what do you mean my liver functions up? And he goes, well, there's all sorts of things that can affect the liver. And so he starts talking about that. And and I realized at this point, here I am. I was pretty close to 39. Here I am, um, healthy, but with this knowledge, with this scientific knowledge on how long am I going to stay that way? And it was really a wake up call. It was like, okay, you've been drinking for 25 years, young lady. The toll is being paid.
Mm.
And so I'm so grateful to the function of the liver, that it actually is something that is one of those organs that really fights for us.
No matter how bad we treat it.
Yes, but if we stop, that's really the key, because I was obviously on the road to psoriasis, and so
Man,
yeah,
the
yeah,
things we do just to
yeah,
survive. Yeah, no,
yeah.
I totally get that. Um, do you have a quote or a mantra that has helped you over the years?
Hmm.
Sometimes it can be like as simple as like, like one of the cliches that we hear in these rooms. Mine's
Right.
obviously one day at a time.
Mine is definitely one day at a time, and I want to live. I mean, I have to be brought to that all the time. Take it easy was one, but that
Yeah.
sounded so hippie, that didn't really do it for me. Because I'd already lived through the 70s and 80s. I didn't need to do it anymore. I really think it is really the first step in the word powerlessness, and I'm powerless over this.
Mm,
And I came to the point, after you walk long enough in the program, and you walk long enough on this sort of thing, you do surrender.
mm,
Um, that I realized that was the most powerful place I could be. And it's really an oxymoron. How could powerlessness be powerful? But that is where the power comes, when we admit that we are powerless over this addiction, over, what this is doing to our bodies, over our lives, this desperation. So that really, that word is more the word for me, because it's
Yeah.
the word I always return to. I mean, I'm having to look at it again, but we'll move into that when we get into long-term
Yeah,
sobriety questions.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna. Okay, so I like to ask people about their self-care routine because in my mind, healing is a ongoing daily practice. So if if you have like a weekly routine or like a morning routine, what does that look like for you?
Well, first thing I do when I get out of bed, or before I get out of bed, is like I acknowledge God and say good morning and thank you for the rest. I also do my stretches in bed because I'm getting older and they're amazing. They help me tremendously. And then I get my cup of coffee and I go have my what we call meditations or devotions. And I do that. That's a 7 day a week thing to keep me realizing who my power comes from, acknowledging God. And then as far as the routine of, I do my nighttime checkup, like, and I go through. I try to keep short accounts, which is very, very important. But it's amazing how those short accounts you can just really tuck away as life gets very, very busy. So it is a good. I try to end my night before I'm doing my bedtime routine,
Mhm.
with kind of assessing my day, taking account of my day, and seeing what needs to be resolved
Mm.
in my heart or with another. And that sometimes I have to wait on because it's late. I do try.
Right.
I do believe. I know everybody talks about sleep, but I do think sleep is so necessary, and
Oh,
it's so hard
huge.
fought. It is so
Yeah.
hard fought. And that is what I do in the morning.
Do you attend a certain number of meetings every week?
I have not been. I don't do AA or Celebrate Recovery. I do the principles of them, but I have a small
Mhm.
group that I meet with um, on Sunday mornings as well as on Monday nights. And then I also have a small group of friends that are my accountability partners that I'm always talking to. And if I feel something that's going on, I've learned it's time to speak up, and that's where I speak up.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
that's
I
so
speak up in
huge.
all of them actually.
Yeah. I think that's so huge having community. You mentioned accountability, having small groups, and it is really the principles and the components of those things that help us stay sober. So I just love hearing how everybody does it a little bit different. We all have to find something that works for us. So that's awesome.
I remember being in an AA meeting one time, and a woman who had been around for a long time said, "You need to find the community that you're going to stick with and stay with and work through this." And I really loved her. Hers happened, and she goes, "Mine happens to be a church." And that's what she said. And and that always stuck with me. It was interesting. But the point is we are, like you said, in community. We are opening ourselves up. We're not closing ourselves off because isolation, we know what isolation does. And that's
Yes,
different than
we do.
silence.
Right.
Yeah.
That's actually a good point. The difference between silence and isolation. Yeah, staying connected to others is really important. What's one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
That was going to be a long road, but it was going to be the best road of my life. Not that I was not going to have hardships, not that people weren't going to leave or die, or relationships were not going to change. But ultimately, there is an incredible goodness to surrendering this addiction or whatever the addictions are and the co-addictions. And it's so powerful that it is the best road, hard road, but the best road you can ever take. And I
Absolutely.
also wish I knew, and this is what I use with all my children, particularly my youngest, whom I adopted later in life, is I said, and this is the one thing I wish I had thought of, is like, you can either do it today, or we can keep doing this, keep going on the same way we have been, which has, is the definition of insanity, for another 5-10 years. And then you have that much more. And they talk about that in AA, as well as Celebrate Recovery. And I just wish I understood that component, but sometimes you have to live that to understand.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm grateful I'm not doing it again. I still have much work to do, but the road is great. The road
Right. The path gets narrower, but the view gets better. I love that. Well, let's take a little step back. You mentioned that you had started drinking at 14 or had your first drink at 14. What kind of things led up to you feeling like you needed to drink?
I definitely, even as a child, there's a great story told in my family, that we would be driving through a town on the way to the beach, in the brown station wagon. That, this is back in the days you didn't have to wear safety belt. And, you piled everybody in the car. My mother would drive 80 miles down the road with a muffler sparking and all this. And so we would go through the town, and I would see inevitably a funeral or something. My eyes were always directed to that. And I asked my dad, I said, Dad, who died? And everybody was really quiet for a second. And then we all started laughing, because how would Dad know who died in the city that we were not in? But death had always been something that was very, very close to me. I lost my cousin. I lost family friends. There was other losses. Even, people underestimate what the effects of losing a pet are
Oof.
on, is on children.
Yeah.
It's huge. And my sister, my dear sweet sister Robin, and I watched our little sweet puppy and Lovely actually be run over. And you look at all these things, and it really, by the time I got to be 14, you add that combination, plus, I don't know about you, but at 14, that is crazy time for a female. You want to fit in, you don't fit in, you're trying to figure out where you should fit in, and how you could fit in, and how you really could be seen. And then you add that to, the parents who are doing very, very, they're doing their best to parent you, but at the same time, they're working very hard. And you don't, as a 14-year-old, you're not sure who to turn to and what to do. So, I had a friend just off the cuff say, well, why don't you have a drink or something, settle down or something? And
Calm down. Have a
I know, just
drink.
calm down, quit having all these things. And so I tried my first Coors beer, and no offense to the Coors company, because they're a decent company. If
They're doing fine. Don't
they're
worry.
doing fine. And
Yes.
but I did not like beer, but I was literally hell bent on drinking, and I became quite the expert at it, to the point of blackouts very, very early. And my parents' house this was during the 70s, 80s, where cocktail parties were the thing. So they had a very well stocked bar. So I got to sample, and nobody noticed. And I quickly became a raging alcoholic, who, even then, I exhibited functionality, because I was on the tennis team, practicing really hard. I was into acting. I wanted to be an actress. I was into my school, passing, doing very well in school. So I was very functioning, but at the same time, there was this very dark side to me. I happened to know all sorts of people groups at that time. So I felt like I kind of shifted around to different people. Like, here are my drinking friends, here are my tennis buddies, here are my, the studious people. So that is the history. And
So
that's what,
you were binge drinking
oh,
like frequently,
oh, absolutely. Every
like every
weekend.
weekend? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't do it
Starting at
during
14.
school. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that was functional. You don't do that during school.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that. Yeah,
Um,
you and I have so many parallels. I didn't know about the dog. I don't ever remember sharing this, but I saw my dog get run over when I was very young. My
wow.
parents were still married, so I was probably 7, at least 7. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it is very traumatic on a little one. Okay, so you start binge drinking, but you're able to maintain. When did you start experiencing consequences from your drinking? You mentioned blacking out. I would imagine that would be problematic at certain points.
That was problematic, but I don't know how it happened. But people would continually rescue me, pick me
Mm,
up, put me in say. I mean, it was obviously I was protected, and I have no idea why, but people would make sure that I was safe. And I would get back. I mean, to this day, when we all have these stories, everybody's listening. If they remember these stories, how you crawled up to bed. I literally crawled up the bed as a 16-year-old. Um, uh, so I didn't have any real consequences, except for this is the most firm one I did have is I decided my senior year I was just going to blow it out. I was just going to party. Of course, I had to maintain my grades, but I was just going to party like there was no tomorrow, and I did. But my tennis started failing. I wasn't playing well on the courts. I didn't get the acting part I wanted, even though I worked hard for it. And even my grades, they stayed up there, but it was still there was slippage, and there was the biggest consequence was how I felt.
right.
And the other consequence I had was by making that decision, I was shutting everybody out. I said, I closed my Bible for the last time and I said, I don't need this. I'm going to go my own way. And
Mm,
it was like I gave myself over to rebellion. And then that was my consequence because I had no help whatsoever.
oof,
And
yeah.
my friends would occasionally bring up something, but everybody kind of tiptoed. I guess I was a real vicious canoe, because no one would say, Renee, you have a real big problem.
Yeah.
I had one friend, I think, who said that, like, I'm worried about you. And I'm like, I'm fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was in your high school years. So if you fast forward to, you said you went through a period of praying and asking God to remove this obsession from you. Talk to me about that. What
Mhm.
led up to that? Because oftentimes, the consequences, some people get DUIs, some people, you know, hurt others. What was it that led you to that? I need to pray and ask God to remove this obsession.
I was hurting others.
Mm.
I had left my first husband, um, and I had found another person. And I mean, so men, we know that that would be my co-problem. Cycling through men
Same.
that, and so it was getting to the point where it was no longer what I really, really realized is, oh my goodness, the same problems I had in that first relationship or the other relationships or the relationships before then. Cause then after a while you quit having relationships. It's not relationship, it's just another chemical. And then you get into another relationship and you go, okay, this will be different. Well, no, it isn't. And yet I'm the common denominator. And that was the biggest thing for me. I realized I was the common denominator because these are totally different people. And so that was really a very big um, indicator that something was going on. But really, honestly, it was having my first child. And I didn't drink. I didn't drink during my pregnancy. I just held back because I knew I had a brother who was born with a special need. I didn't, I knew enough about alcohol and that this is a possibility. This could do something to the baby. So I just, as everything else, I controlled it. I said no. So when I had this baby, I was very alert, very aware, and I went, there's something different going on here in life. And life is bigger than what I've made it. And then I had my second, nothing changed. I started going to this church. And I mean, even when I go to, it was half-hearted. It was like, okay, I'm listening to you, but you're wrong, but I'll continue listening to you. At least I'm in community. And I did not know that's what I needed. I needed to be with people because I was so isolated from my drinking, from my life, because we had moved from Miami to North Carolina. And, but it was, I still to this day remember, I was writing, it was so funny. I was watching HTV. I was drinking some red wine, and I was writing a Sunday school notes out for a Sunday school class I had to teach the next day. And I all of a sudden paused and went, there's something really weird about this. And I'm not saying Christians don't drink, because Christians do, and they can, handle their glasses of wine or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
But I'm going, there's something just weird about this whole mix,
Yeah.
And so that's when I started to pray. It woke me up. I was like, there's something that's I'm missing here. And so that's
did it feel like that still small voice inside, like something it's like your Jiminy Cricket voice?
it really was. It was that tap. I always referred to the tap. It was the tap on the shoulder, like, and it was this thing that pay attention to this.
Pay attention.
Just pay attention. There's something here that's not right. What is it?
Something's
So I
not
went,
right.
okay, God, what's going on here? And so that's when I started to pray and wake up.
Yeah. How did you find AA?
This was back in the day, and no one is going to understand what this word is. It's called the phone book. Because we didn't have the internet,
I know. I think my audience is largely made up of people like us.
No, that's good. So everybody will understand.
People that were born in the 1900s.
Yeah. So they will understand. But even then, I don't know about you, but you look at the phone book and you think, oh, what happened? Because I remember when they started fading out. But I went to the phone book and I called the number. I got a group in High Point, and I started going there.
How did you know to look for AA? Had you just heard about AA, or?
I'm sure, because I read everything. How we used to read things without having that little rectangle, I'll never know. But I actually used to go to the library. Actually, you would read the newspaper. I would look through the telephone book, because we had to use the telephone book for everything.
And you would see ads or something?
You would see, well, it was not only that, it's under A. A is your first one.
Right.
And so you would see, you would, whatever you were looking for. So A was always the first page. And so I just knew. And I think probably from my parents' people group, which was very cocktail oriented, there might have been people.
Some of them had to go.
Somebody somewhere down the line mentioned it as a resource.
Yeah, no, it always fascinates me how people come across it. And it's so interesting how mainstream it is nowadays. Like people talk about it on sitcoms. There's that show Mom, and the mom is sober, she goes to AA, and just it's in movies. And so it's just interesting how it's out there in the mainstream. And how people, like, I found it through my mom dated somebody that was sober when I was 14. That's when I started drinking. And I was like, oh, I could never be an alcoholic. I don't like the taste. And then they told me that, oh, well, there's flavored alcohol. And I was like, oh, got it. Thanks.
I know there's a solution to every problem, isn't there? Right?
There's a way around.
Right.
Was there anything about AA that you were like, oh, I don't want to go, or this isn't for me, or?
No, I needed to go. I mean, after being so desperate, I just know I needed to go. Um, Listening to the people who have gone before you and listening to their wisdom and advice is
Yeah.
speaking, being able to speak up and say, I'm struggling with this today,
Right.
invaluable. Everything about it was invaluable. I got to the point where I was asked to lead some meetings.
Mhm.
And I just think that was, the rah-rah tennis player in me. But I even I enjoyed being able, because that was a good way to give back
Oh,
is,
service. Yeah. Get
yeah, the
involved
service
and
is really, really important. The one thing I will say, what I do like about Celebrate Recovery is they break you up into male and female. And
Mhm.
I'm not going into the gender identity thing. I'm just saying it makes it, for me, it made it safer where I could say things that I did not feel like I could speak. I did not want
Yeah.
to speak in the large setting in front of men. And
Mhm.
that's the one thing I really do like about Celebrate Recovery. You can do that.
Yeah. And you can do that in AA too. There's closed women's meetings, and
Which,
that's,
yes, and I never went to them because they were at the wrong time. And I do remember that they did have
yeah.
that. And I think
Yeah.
that's invaluable to people, which wherever you're going, is to
Yeah.
get into a group where you can really, really, because there are things, about dealing with that kind of thing that you
Mhm.
just say among, a people group who happen to be women.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage to attend some of those as well. So
You
you
know
can
what's so
see it there.
funny? I did not like women when I first got sober. I didn't like women in general because I saw them. I was so like a male, or like all my validation came from men. And women were competition, unfortunately, at the time. I didn't have so I didn't actually like women's meetings for a long time. But I now encourage women to do women's meetings for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is some occasional predatory behavior in some 12-step groups. When I first got there, I was 25. I was like bleach blonde. There was this tiny little thing, and the women would take me aside and be very careful. They would say, "Be careful of the wolves in sheep clothing. It's better that you stick with the women, just especially in the beginning, because the cross addiction thing is like love addiction. Like that's a thing.
It
That's a
is
real
very
thing."
much. How many times have we been and someone said, I found somebody, and you say, well, how many months are you sober? Well, I'm sober 1 month. And I'm going, no, no, no,
Eee.
please don't do this. Don't do
Eh,
this.
Don't do that. No, because in the reason they say that, oh, you probably shouldn't date your first year of recovery is because you're unhealed and you are dealing with a lot of wounds. And if you get with somebody, you're attracting somebody with the equal opposite wounds, right? They say that water seeks its own level,
Yeah.
right? And so you really want to give yourself a minute to heal
Yeah.
before you jump into a relationship, because your wounded self will not be attracted to the same type of person as your healed self will be.
Well, and how many of us really, the majority, I would say, and this is not scientific, have some sort of father issue,
Daddy
and
issues.
daddy issues, and we need to.
Yes,
Those are the
ma'am.
things we need to work through, and to get involved with another man. That, I mean, already I've had enough train wrecks, and so I
Yes,
didn't
yeah.
need any more train wrecks.
Yeah,
I
you're
needed
all done, all full up with that experience. No,
Like, we have
so
enough to work on. There's enough inventory material here. I'm
yeah,
not going to lack. Not going to lack for anything. Yeah. So,
that is so funny. You are speaking my language. Oh, that's
yeah,
hilarious. So did you jump in and like get a sponsor and work the steps and do the whole thing in the beginning?
I did. I did. I
Yeah.
tried very hard to get my sponsor, and I would walk around and, here I was, I was probably this little desperate person with a little tin cup, you know, something like out of Oliver Twist. And I would say, will you be my sponsor? And, a lot of people are very busy and they couldn't
Yeah.
take that. So for a while, I mean, I just followed the book. I followed
Mm,
the steps. I did, my morning routines. I did my nighttime routines of, taking a short account of the day. And then I did finally find sponsors, or just one sponsor. And
yeah.
then from there, I realized the value of walking very closely with people. I also, in tangent, was still going to church. So I,
Mm,
I had I had the double beauty of going to my pastor and saying, this is what's going on, and then going to my small group and saying, this is what's going on. I need you all for accountability. Will you be that, please?
mhm.
Because I'd already told them a lot of my stuff, or most of my stuff, but there was still, there's always more to cover, because we're great hiders of the truth.
Ah, we are the easiest to deceive. We deceive ourselves easier than anybody else. No, that's really important. And I think when we talked before, you mentioned you were doing A for a couple years and you moved to Celebrate Recovery. It sounds like you had always had a pretty close relationship with God as, higher power, God, however people understand that. Um, I'm
Actually,
sure.
no. No, I
No,
went
okay.
no, no, I broke up with God very, very firmly when I shut my Bible at 16.
Okay.
And then I became an atheist for
You
decades.
did.
I did. I did for decades. And I didn't want to think about God. I didn't want to hear about God. I laughed at anybody who mentioned him. Um, I, I was a terror in that regard. I disregarded everything. And then we moved up to North Carolina and, to the Bible Belt from Miami. And so I would get these little knocks on this door from this sweet, dear friend of mine, she wasn't a friend at the time. And she would say, "Do you want to go to church with me?" And with me. And I looked at her, I said, because I was so like, and I looked at her, I said,
You-
"Look, I'm
You're
not going
mouthing
to
things on a
stop."
podcast.
I know, I know. I said, "Get off my back."
I'll get out my
I will
back.
do
Okay.
whatever I can. Um, and I said to her, I said, "Look, I will come to your church, but I'm not going to stop drinking. Okay." And that's what I said to her. And so I started going to her church, and I didn't stop drinking, but I kept going to her church. And so my relationship with the Lord was, it was something very, it's just like everything else in my, it was the one thing I couldn't control, which was very interesting to me. But it was very slow, and I learned a lot of things that I needed to learn. Um, Meanwhile, seeking, I mean, it was all about healing, seeking
Mhm.
and being powerless, and him being powerful. And that was how I came back. So
That's
I,
amazing. Yeah, that's it. We have that in common as well. I grew up in the church, and then at some point I just gave up on it. I was never atheist, but I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. But it's so interesting that when we get desperate to change and we're in enough pain, it really interesting how we go back to the thing that of our child, like, a higher power of our childhood to
it
seek
is,
help. Yeah. I want to transition a little bit into your book. I know you've experienced a lot of loss, and I really admire your ability to really do that self-examination, but like to just dig in there and to bring it all. Writing is such a, I've been writing a book myself, and it is such a process of internal examination and just like pulling it all out. What was the experience of writing this book for you? What was that like?
it started out after the death of my mother, and that was in 2018. But it was 2020 when working with my life coach, and I said, we were talking about my writing, and I said, which of these ideas, I was throwing all my ideas up her. So what should I be working on? What should I? And so she pinpointed that one. Let's work on this grief book after the flowers die. And so I started pouring into that. In the beginning, it was because I do it a lot, most all of it through story. There's always the story. It's somebody else's, but I rearrange it, I conglomerate it, because I don't want to tell other people's business. But it started out as relief. It
Mhm.
started out as real relief, and just all of a sudden things that would come up, like what are the blessings here? Which was a neat thing. My sister and I, we were up, and my parents were, there comes that day. None of us as kids, as adult kids, wanted to go into the house and do anything with the house. We were pushed by the lawyer, like, you got to do stuff with your house because we got to put it up for sale.
Mm.
And so we went up, my sister and I went there to go, and we ended up in the closet with all the Christmas decorations, which I'm just going, it's the end of the day. I wanted to get home. I needed to get home. I was tired. I had to drive 3.5 hours.
Oof.
And so we're looking at all these Christmas decorations. I said, Robin, let's just take the meaningful things out, give the things that other people have given mom and dad, and let's just give the rest away. And she was being so painstaking, looking over everything. And in this beauty of, well, in that point, I didn't count it as beauty, but then she sat down, she plopped on the ground, she had a shoebox. She opens it up and she's really, really quiet. And I go, Robin, let's just give it away. And she goes, Renee, these are love letters between mom and dad.
Oh,
These were 50, well, at that time, probably 60-year-old letters that they had written each other before they got married.
wow.
And I learned so much from that, because when you're going through your parents' stuff, take somebody with you, because you want to give in to, let's just give this all away, but you have no idea what you might be giving away. The most
Right.
precious things that we have.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it started out as that things I had lived out,
Mhm.
and then things other people were experiencing, other things I knew people had experienced. And I was writing one per day because I had actually then had a deadline because I
Mm.
had a publisher. And it's, as you well know, I don't know what you're writing on, but it became very heavy and very deep, and I really needed to pay attention to a lot of self-care. So taking a walk in silence became something very, very, very important to me. Getting out of the house, getting some fresh air, maintaining that connection, with the world, which was at this point was now going crazy,
Mhm.
all the COVID.
Oh, yeah, during the pandemic.
Yeah. And so I live on a farm. So I would just go out and take a walk. So it was one of those things I knew I need to get balance in, because this could just sink the boat real quickly.
Mhm.
But it is very cathartic. I think I'm saying that correctly. That sounded weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's close enough.
Close. I know what you mean.
Yeah,
I can't think of it
it
either.
wasn't carcinogenic, so it was
No.
cathartic. So it was very helpful and healing
Yeah.
to me to get out and make that connection with
Yeah.
the, to see the ground, to feel the ground, to walk the ground, the dog to come, the birds to fly,
Yeah.
the sunsets and all that.
Yeah. What are some of the things you use to help you process this grief?
I I still do a lot of writing. I do a lot of praying. Well, I don't do as not much praying as I, I reminisce. This is the year of reminiscence for me. I think it was very
Mhm.
nostalgic. And even towards my brother, my eldest brother Roger, and I had a talk. And there's a lot of things that go on with parents. Oh, there's so much going on. You look at the bad, and you look at the pains and the wounds, and then you start going, okay, but this is where they are. And you start looking at their history, and you go back a couple generations, and you go, my goodness, mom and dad did really well. They did really well, given their circumstances. And then you come out, and we were just bragging on our parents about how well they did, and how well they did in life.
Mhm.
for everything that they walk through. Um, so, that seems to be the path that my storytelling takes, my life takes, is to kind of process it and hold it. And you almost nurture a little bit of it, and then you talk to somebody else, most definitely, and that seems to be the way I go through things.
Yeah, processing the person as a whole. I had that same experience, going through all my mom's things, and we had to, she had a whole household for me to deal with alone, basically. And it was interesting to see her as a whole person, not just my mom, right? But as her whole history, right? You go through all the things, and then it does change your perspective on who they are. I had that same experience, feeling like, wow, my mom did so good. Like, just so proud. She did so well for herself and led such a good life. It does sort of change your perspective from mom to whole person.
I think there's something about coming to realizing you're the last generation, right? I
Oof,
don't know if
yeah.
your grandmother is still alive, but
Oh my God, her
uh,
mother is still alive at 96 and a half.
okay, you're not the last generation, but you realize,
I know what
there
you
is
mean,
something,
though.
but it is something I came to a realization. I'm the last generation,
Yeah,
up from my children
yeah.
that's here. And
We're the elders now.
we are the elders,
Isn't that
we,
scary?
that is really scary.
No pressure. Right.
Performance.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think you're right. What we do is we go through that, and we come out in grace.
Hmm.
I mean, you they forgave us, we forgive them,
Yeah,
and then you realize the beauty of their life, how they
yeah.
lived it, and how they walked through their own struggles.
The
So
forgiveness is such an interesting piece, right? Because like I don't know about you, but I learned that, my mother that raised me, she was a young woman, right? And she changed dramatically over the years, right? And I was still, in some sense, in some ways, like still relating to her as the little girl to that woman that she used to be. I used to tell my kids, this might sound terrible, but I'm going to say it out loud anyway.
go
I
for
would tell my boys when they were little, I'm like, that sweet little old lady who comes here to visit you, that is not the bitch that raised me.
it.
Right?
She's a different woman, right?
She was a different woman. Yeah, she completely changed. And over the years, I recognized that when I was little and needed her to be like the sweet, nurturing mom, she was under a lot of stress and she had a lot of unhealed stuff herself. Right. And so that's when she was parenting me. She was parenting me from this unhealed, stressed out place, probably not the best version of herself. Right. And over time, I, did my best to forgive that. It's like sometimes, they say that, oh, they did the best that they could. Well, you know what? Sometimes it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough to not cause harm.
Right.
Right. Harm was caused. And I live with that, and I can also give her grace, right?
Yes,
And it's a
I
tough,
absolutely.
do you know what I'm saying? It's like
Oh,
it's a tightrope that we walk sometimes. It's like, and when she died, all I could see was the best parts of her. And I really regretted not being able to resolve the pain that I had towards her, like the anger that I had towards her. And there was a lot of guilt about not being able to let go of it. But what I was taught was that I did the best that I could at the time. And
and
now
again, it's a process,
it's a
and
process. Yeah.
but I think as long as you come out on the end of forgiveness, we all eventually have to go here, or we
Yeah.
do some sort of behavior that's going to suit that.
Right. Yeah, and so the forgiveness in this context for me was not just forgiveness towards her, but forgiveness to myself that I wasn't able to let it go before she died.
Yes. Well, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. My dad and I had always butted heads, always, always, always. And I look back on that, and we had the last 3 years of his life were the best that we ever lived,
Mm.
and which was very sweet. I'm not saying we were out bungee jumping or anything like that, but we would sit on the back porch and we would talk, and he'd go, "Well, Renee," and so we would talk. Um, and it turned out we had a lot of common ground to talk about.
Yeah.
But even in his last days, which I did not know were his last days, of course.
Oh,
I mean, he was older, but there was an issue that arose, and I needed to say something to my father about it. And it wasn't with me; it was between he and my mom. And my mother she was so sweet, but she fought, cancer for 12 years.
12
Um,
years.
and
Wow.
and there was a little bit of her that never wanted to confront my dad. I was the one chosen to go, okay, Renee, you need to speak to your dad about this. And I accepted that. I accepted that. I don't know why, but I was in my uh, not my best self of understanding boundaries. That no, mom, you need to speak to dad. But this time I did because she was in a weakened state. I just simply said something to him, and the conversation, he always ended in it, and I love you. And it didn't end that way.
Mm.
And my sister had a conversation, and I don't think she minded, but she was in, and she had a conversation similar to that. But I had the opportunity to talk to him one more time, and it was back to, well, Renee, and then I love you. So, there are these little moments where we do get the redemption and forgiveness,
Mhm.
that we really, our hearts really do crave. And sometimes it
Yeah.
doesn't, like your case, but at the same time, you have come to that place now. I mean, how does that feel for you? I mean, are you resting in that place now, or?
Yeah, yeah, and forgiveness for her and myself. I mean, I realize, I do a lot of studying about psychology and neuroscience and things like that. So I am aware that, my default mode network, my patterns of thinking and behaving and, were set in childhood. And so that's what I'm working from. But I don't hold the same regret. Like, I wish you would have been different. Like, that was part of the opposite of forgiveness is probably condemnation in some way or judgment in some way. And there was just this wish that she had been different. However, if she had been different, I would not be the woman that I am today. Like, I am aware that the places that, the wounds that I carry are make me sensitive to other people's pain in ways that others are not. Like, it makes me uniquely qualified, to sniff out the pain and be like, oh, that's this. I can pinpoint certain kinds of pain for people and name it for them.
Mm,
And when they can't, or help them to arrive to their own conclusions, and then offer solutions that helped me. So I'm grateful that she was the way she was when I was little,
because it made you the woman that you
because I'm
are.
grateful for who I am today.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's really helpful, being a person who is so into someone's life, so walking with them in their journey, that you're able to say, well, this is what I'm seeing. I think sometimes we have a tendency, as friends, to hold back. And I think that is the
Yeah.
true definition of friendship right there.
Yeah, I do it more in a coaching capacity that people, when people come to me for help on getting sober or working through like the core issues. But I never offer without permission.
Right.
I could,
Right.
because I am a self-proclaimed people pleaser, rescuer. I love rescuing. I love feeling useful. Right. Like, but offering solutions to somebody who isn't open to them, it's like throwing pebbles against armor.
It is.
And
is.
so in my mind, my job is to make somebody feel seen, heard, and understood so that they feel safe enough to put the armor down.
I just have given, and I was just talking about real close relationships because I've told all my friends, I said, you all are my accountability partners. You know, if
Mm.
you see something, please call me out on it, which
Ooh,
is
that's so
really,
good.
it is really good.
That's brave.
It's sometimes when they call, they go, Renee, I'm like, oh no, here it comes. But I'm always so very thankful that they had the gumption to come to me and they had the love for me to do.
I bet it matters though how they say it, because there's that old saying that honesty without compassion is cruelty,
That's,
right? So it matters how it is said.
yeah. Well, it really matters how it's said. And I do, like you were saying, you do it under a certain capacity.
Mhm.
I have to go back to the character of the person who's saying it to me. Like
Oh
I'm not
yeah,
going to just take this from anybody. I have
right.
their character to know that they understand it. This is not some sort of frontal attack or the pebbles, whatever. Yeah,
Right.
I do check it. I do check it.
Yeah, don't be throwing birdshot at me.
Yeah. Mustn't have that. No.
All right. No, it absolutely matters who says it,
Yes.
right? There has to be like a level of trust, like, oh, I know you've been through this before, so your word matters to me. I think that's why peer support works so well, because the power differential is level, right there. And it's somebody who's had that same experience. Like you can see it in their eyes. Like my first sponsor, I could see in her eyes that she got my kind of crazy. Like,
Exactly.
yeah. And then she go, oh, if you think that's bad, I got a story for you. And it wasn't like she was trying to one up me. She did it so that I would feel comfortable and safe and sharing more.
Yes. And it
Yeah.
develops that bond that you need so desperately to realize you are not walking alone. You are
Mhm.
walking with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's so,
that serves you in grief too, is that you are
yeah.
walking. Because I started writing that book because 5 of us lost our parents in 2016,
5 of you,
and
you in
5
your
of my
peer group, like
friends.
your friends. Oh
Yes,
man.
and so it was really very odd to realize you're a certain age and you're supposed to act grown up, and you have no idea what it is like.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you feel like the orphan, and I don't say
Yeah.
orphan lightly because I adopted 2 daughters from China. But,
Oh,
you feel all of a sudden, what is this? How am I going to handle this? I
yeah.
thought I was, and I would turn to my sister. I said, Robin, I thought we were a little more down the road than this. And no, we're not. It's a great leveler of, um, all of a sudden you run back to that scared 8-year-old child.
Yeah. We go
Uh,
back to our default setting a lot of times, especially in trauma.
yes.
Well, I'm so grateful to have books like this. Again, the title is After the Flowers Die, Encouragement for Walking Through Life After Loss. Thank you so much for writing this book. I know it's going to help lots of people because we all experience loss at some point. The loss of parents can be very disorienting. So it's nice to, have a friend that can kind of guide you through the process. If people want to learn more about you or get your book, where can people learn more about you?
It's ReneeLeonardKennedy.com, and that's RENEE, LeonardKennedy.com. And that's my website. And that will tell you
Awesome.
everything and have little extra goodies you can read
Oh,
and
fun.
whatnot.
Well, it was so lovely to spend this time with you today. Thank you so much for being so gracious with your time. And I look forward to future conversations.
Well, thank you so much and bless your day. Just bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.